17. Involuntarily reviewing the impressions left on his mind by the conversations at dinner and after, Karenina returned to his solitary room. What Dolly had said about forgiveness had merely vexed him. Whether or not to apply the Christian principle to his own case was too difficult a question to be lightly discussed, and Karenina had long since answered it in the negative. Of all that had been said, the words of the silly good-natured Turufzin had sunk deepest into his mind. He acted like a brick, challenged the other man, and killed him. Evidently everybody had agreed with that, though they were too polite to say so. However, that point is settled and not worth thinking about, said Karenin to himself, and with nothing in his mind but his impending journey and his work of inspection, he went to his room and asked the doorkeeper, who followed him, where his valet was. The man replied that the valet had just gone out. Karenin ordered tea, sat down at a table, took up a timetable, and began planning his journey. 2 telegrams, said the valet, entering. Excuse me, Your Excellency, I'd only just gone out. Karenin took the telegrams and opened them. The first contained the news that Stremov had obtained the very appointment Karenin had been hoping for. He threw down a telegram and flushed. Rising, he began to pace the room. Quos vult perdere dementat, he thought. Quos being those who had had a hand in making the appointment. He was vexed, not so much at having missed that post himself, and at having been obviously passed over, as at the incomprehensible and surprising fact that they did not realize how much less suitable than anyone else was that voluble windbag, Stremov. How was it they did not see that by giving him that post, they were ruining themselves and their own prestige? Something else of the same kind, he thought bitterly, as he opened the second telegram. It was from his wife, and Anna, written in blue pencil, was the first word he saw. I am dying. I beg and entreat you, come. I shall die easier for your forgiveness, he read. Smiling contemptuously, he threw down the telegram. His first thought was that beyond doubt it was only falsehood and cunning. She would not hesitate at any deception. She was going to be confined. Perhaps that is the illness. But what can they be aiming at? To legitimize the child? Compromise me and prevent a divorce? He reflected. But there is something about dying. He reread the telegram, and was suddenly struck by the direct meaning of the words. Supposing it is true, he said to himself. If it is true, and at the moment of suffering and approach to death, she is sincerely repentant, and I, believing it to be false, refuse to come. It would not only be cruel, and everybody would condemn me, but it would be stupid on my part. Peter, keep the carriage. I'm returning to Petersburg, he told the valet. He decided to go back to Petersburg and see his wife. If the news of her illness were false, he would go away again, saying nothing. But if she were really ill and dying, and wished to see him before her death, he would, should he find her still living, forgive her. And should he arrive too late, he would perform his last duty to her. While on his way, he did not again think about what he should do. With the sense of fatigue and want of cleanliness resulting from a night spent in a railway carriage, Karenin drove through the fog of a Petersburg morning, along the deserted Nevsky, looking straight before him and not thinking of what awaited him. He dared not think of it, because when he imagined what would happen, he could not drive from his mind the thought that her death would at once dissolve all the difficulties of the situation. Bakers, the closed shops, nighties vostiks, and men sweeping the pavements passed before his eyes. And watching all this, he tried to stifle the thought of what lay before him, and of what he dared not desire, and yet could not help desiring. The carriage stopped at the porch. A carriage with a coachman asleep on the box, and in his voschik were standing at the entrance. As he entered the hall, Karenin dragged forth his resolve, as it were, from a remote corner of his brain, and conned it over. It said, If it is all a fraud, then calm contempt and leave again. If true, keep up appearances. The door was opened by the hall porter before Karenina had time to ring. The porter, Petrov, otherwise Kapitonich, looked strange in an old coat without a tie and in slippers. "How is your mistress?" "Safely delivered yesterday." Karenina halted and turned pale. Now he clearly realized how much he had desired her death. "And her health?" Corny, wearing his morning apron, came running downstairs. "Very bad," he said. "There was a consultation yesterday, and the doctor is here now." "Take my things," said Karenin, and somewhat relieved by the news that there was still some hope of her dying, he entered the ante-room. On the hall stand was hanging a military coat, and he noticed it. "Who is here?" "The doctor, the midwife, and Count Vronsky." Karenin passed on to the inner apartment. There was no one in the drawing-room, but the midwife, with lilac ribbons in her cap, came out of Anna's boudoir. She approached Karenin, and with a familiarity bred by death's approach, took him by the hand and led him toward the bedroom. "Thank God you've come. She talks only about you and nothing but you," said she. "Be quick and bring the ice," came the authoritative sound of the doctor's voice from the bedroom. Karenin entered the boudoir. Beside the table, sitting with his side toward the back of a low chair, was Vronsky, his hands covering his face, weeping. At the sound of the doctor's voice he jumped up, uncovered his face, and saw Karenin. But at sight of her husband he was filled with such confusion that he again sat down, drawing his head down between his shoulders as if trying to become invisible. Then, making an effort, he rose and said, "She's dying. The doctors say there is no hope. I am entirely in your hands. But allow me to remain here, please. However, I am in your hands. The sight of Vronsky's tears made Karenina aware of the approach of that mental perturbation which other people's visible sufferings always aroused in him. And turning away his head, he went toward the door without heeding what Vronsky was saying. Anna's voice, talking about something, came from the bedroom. It sounded cheerful and animated, and its articulation was extremely distinct. Karenina entered and went up to the bed. She lay with her face toward him. Her cheeks were rosy red, her eyes glittered, and her little white hands, from which the cuffs of her dressing jacket had been pushed back, toyed with the corner of the blanket, twisting it. She appeared not only fresh and well, but in the best of spirits. She spoke rapidly, in a ringing voice with extraordinarily accurate intonations, full of feeling. "Because Alexis, I'm speaking of Alexis Alexandrovich. How strange and terrible that they are both called Alexis, is it not? Alexis would not have refused me. I should have forgotten, and he would have forgiven. But why does he not come? He is kind. He himself does not know how kind he is. Oh God, what weariness! Give me some water, quick. But it will be bad for her, for my little girl. Well, all right. Well, let her have a nurse. Well, I agree, it will be better so. He will come back, and it will pain him to see her. Take her away. Anna Arkadyevna, he has come. Here he is, said the midwife, trying to draw Anna's attention to Alexis Alexandrovich. What nonsense, Anna went on, taking no notice of her husband. But let me have her. Let me have my little girl. He has not come yet. You say he won't forgive me, because you don't know him. No one knew him, only I, and even for me it has become hard. One must know his eyes. Serejas are just the same. That's why I can't bear to see them. Have they given Sereja his dinner? Don't I know that everybody will forget? He would not forget. Sereja must be moved into the corner room, and Mariette must be asked to sleep with him. Suddenly she recoiled, became silent and frightened, and put her arms before her face, as if in expectation of a blow. She had seen her husband. "No, no," she began again. "I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of death. Alexis, come here. I am in a hurry because I have no time. I have not long to live. I shall soon become feverish, and then I shall no longer understand anything. Now I understand everything, and see everything." Over Karenin's drawn face came a look of suffering. He took her hand and was about to say something, but could not speak. His lower jaw trembled. He struggled with his agitation, every now and then glancing at her. And every time he did so, he saw her eyes looking at him with such tender and ecstatic emotion as he had never before seen in them. "Wait a bit. You don't know. Wait. She paused as if to collect her thoughts. "Yes," she continued. Yes. This is what I wish to say. Don't be surprised at me. I am still the same. But there is another in me as well, and I am afraid of her. She fell in love with that other one, and I wish to hate you, but could not forget her who was before. That other is not I. Now I am the real one, all of me. I am dying now. I know I am. Ask him. Even now I feel it. Here they are, my hands and feet and fingers. Whole hundredweights are on them. My fingers, see how enormous they are. But all this will soon end. I only want one thing. Forgive me completely. I'm dreadfully bad, but the nurse told about the holy martyr. What was her name? She was worse. And I shall go to Rome. There is a wilderness there, and then I shall be in nobody's way. I shall only take Sir Reggie and the little girl. No, you cannot forgive me. I know that I cannot be forgiven. No. You are too good. With one hot hand she held his, while with the other she pushed him away. The perturbation in Karenin's soul went on increasing, and reached a point where he gave up struggling against it. Suddenly he felt that what he had taken for perturbation was on the contrary a blissful state of his soul, bringing him joy such as he had never known before. He was not thinking that the law of Christ, which all his life he had tried to fulfill, told him to forgive and love his enemies, but a joyous feeling of forgiveness and love for his enemies filled his soul. He knelt with his head resting on her bent arm, which burned through its sleeve like fire, and sobbed like a child. She put her arm round his bald head, moved closer to him, and looked up with an expression of proud defiance. Here he is. I knew. Now goodbye to all. Goodbye. They've come again. Why don't they go away? Take these furs off me. The doctor moved her arms and carefully drew the bedcloths over her shoulder. She meekly lay down on her back and gazed with radiant eyes straight before her. Remember that the only thing I want is your forgiveness. I wish for nothing else. Why does he not come in? She cried, calling to Vronsky on the other side of the door. Come. Give him your hand. Vronsky came to her bedside and, on seeing Anna, again hid his face in his hands. Uncover your face. Look at him. He is a saint, said she. Uncover. Yes, uncover your face, she went on angrily. Alexis Alexandrovitch, uncover his face. I want to see him. Karenin took Vronsky's hands and moved them away from his face, terrible with his look of suffering and shame. Give him your hand. Forgive him. Karenin held out his hand, without restraining the tears that were falling. Thank God, she cried. Now everything is ready. Only stretch out my legs a little. That's right. Now it's splendid. How badly those flowers are drawn, not a bit like violets, and she pointed to the wallpaper. Oh my God. When will it all come to an end? Doctor, give me some morphia. Oh my God. And she began to toss in her bed. The doctor and his colleagues said it was puerperal fever, which in 99 cases out of 100 ended fatally. All day she was feverish, delirious, and unconscious. At midnight she lay insensible, with hardly any pulse. The end was expected every moment. Vronsky went away, but came again in the morning to inquire. Karenina met him in the ante-room and said, "Remain here, she may ask for you," and himself showed him into Anna's boudoir. Toward morning she had become excited and animated, and her thoughts and words flowed rapidly. But again this state lapsed into unconsciousness. On the third day she was just the same, and the doctors gave some hope. That day Karenina went out into the boudoir where Vronsky sat, and having locked the door, took a seat opposite him. "Alexis Alexandrovitch," said Vronsky, feeling that an explanation was coming, "I am unable to think, unable to understand. Spare me. However painful it may be to you, believe me, it is still more terrible for me." He was about to rise, but Karenina took him by the hand and said, "I beg you to hear me. It is necessary. I must explain to you my feelings, those that have guided me and will guide me in future, so that you may not misunderstand me. You know that I resolved on a divorce, and had even taken steps toward obtaining it. I will not conceal from you that when I took action, I was in a state of indecision. I suffered, and I confess that I was haunted by a desire for vengeance. On receiving the telegram, I came here with the same feelings. More than that, I wished for her death. But—" he stopped and reflected whether he should reveal his feelings or not. "But I saw her and forgave her. And the joy of forgiving has revealed my duty to me. I have wholly forgiven. I want to turn the other cheek. I want to give my cloak, because my coat has been taken. I only pray God that the joy of forgiving may not be taken from me." Tears filled his eyes, and their clear, calm expression struck Vronsky. "That is my position. You may trample me in the mud, make me the laughing-stock of the world. I will not forsake her, and will never utter a word of reproach to you," continued Karenina. "My duty is clearly defined. I must and will remain with her. If she wishes to see you, I will let you know. But now, I think it will be best for you to leave." He rose, and sobs broke his voice. Vronsky got up at once, and stooping before him, looked up into his face, without unbending his back. He could not understand Karenina, but felt that there was something high and inaccessible to one with his outlook on life. 18. After his conversation with Karenina, Vronsky went out onto the Karenina's porch and then stopped, recalling with difficulty where he was and where he ought to go. He felt ashamed, humiliated, guilty, and deprived of the possibility of cleansing himself from his degradation. He felt himself knocked quite out of the rut, along which he had hitherto trodden so proudly and so lightly. All the apparently solid habits and rules of his life suddenly seemed false and inapplicable. The deceived husband, who up till now had appeared a pitiful creature, an accidental and rather ridiculous obstacle to his happiness, suddenly recalled by her, and raised to a pedestal that inspired the utmost respect. That husband, in his lofty elevation, turned out to be not only not cruel, false, or absurd, but kind, simple, and dignified. Vronsky could not help being conscious of this. They had suddenly exchanged roles. Vronsky felt Karenina's greatness and his own humiliation, Karenina's rightness and his own wrongdoing. He felt that the husband in his sorrow was magnanimous, while he himself was mean and trivial in his deceptions. But the consciousness of his degradation toward the man whom he had unjustly despised accounted for but a small portion of his grief. He was unspeakably miserable because his passion for Anna, which he imagined had of late begun to cool, had become even stronger now that he knew her to be lost to him forever. During her illness he had learned to know her thoroughly, had seen into her very soul, and it seemed to him that he had never loved her before. And just now, when he knew her and loved her in the right way, he had been humiliated before her, and had lost her forever. leaving her nothing but a shameful memory of himself. But most terrible of all was the ridiculous, shameful figure he had cut when Karenina was pulling his hands from before a shame-suffused face. He stood in the porch of the Karenins' house as one in a maze, and did not know what to do next. "Shall I call in his voschik?" inquired the hall porter. "Yes, in his voschik." Returning home after the 3 sleepless nights, Vronsky did not undress, but lay down prone on a sofa, with his head on his folded arms. His head was heavy. Fancies, memories, and most strange thoughts followed one another with extreme rapidity and clearness. Now he saw himself pouring out medicine for the patient and overfilling the spoon. Then he saw the midwife's white hands, or Karenin's curious pose as he knelt on the floor by her bedside. To sleep, to forget, he said to himself, with the calm certainty of a healthy man, that being tired and in want of sleep, he would at once fall asleep. And in fact, in a moment his thoughts grew confused, and he began to fall into the abyss of forgetfulness. The waves of the sea of unconscious life were beginning to close over his head, when all at once he felt as if he had received a violent electric shock. He started so violently that his whole body was thrown upwards on the springs of the sofa, and leaning on his hands he rose to his knees in fear. His eyes were wide open, as if he had not slept at all. The heaviness of his head and the languor of his limbs, of which he had been aware a moment previously, had suddenly vanished. "You may trample me in the mud," he seemed to hear Karenin saying, and he saw Anna's feverishly flushed face and brilliant eyes gazing, not at him, but at Karenin. He saw his own, as it seemed to him, stupid and ridiculous figure when Karenin was drawing his hands away from his face. He stretched out his legs and again threw himself upon the sofa, in the same position as before, and shut his eyes. "Sleep, sleep," he kept repeating to himself. But with his eyes closed, he could see yet more distinctly Anna's face, as he had seen it on that memorable evening before the race. All that is ended and never will be again, and she wishes to efface it from her memory. I can't live without it. Then how can we be reconciled? How can we be reconciled? Said he aloud, and went on unconsciously repeating those words. This reiteration prevented other images and memories which were thronging in his brain from arising. But the repetition of those words did not long hinder his imagination from working. Again, following each other with great rapidity, his happiest moments rose in his fancy, and with them his recent humiliation. "Take away his hands," Anna's voice is saying. Karenin pulls away his hands, and he is conscious of the shame-suffused and stupid expression of his own face. He still lay trying to fall asleep, though he had lost all hope of succeeding, and kept repeating in a whisper random words connected with disjointed thoughts, in order to prevent other images from rising. He listened and heard repeated in a strange mad whisper the words, "Unable to value, unable to enjoy. Unable to value, unable to enjoy." What is this? Am I going mad? He asked himself. Perhaps. What else makes people go mad? What makes them shoot themselves? He replied to his own thought. On opening his eyes, he was surprised to see, close to his head, an embroidered cushion worked by Varya, his brother's wife. Fingering a tassel of the cushion, he tried to think of Varya as he had last seen her. But to think of anything extraneous was painful. No, I must sleep. He moved the cushion and pressed his head against it, but his eyes would not remain closed without effort. He jumped up and sat down. That's at an end for me, he thought. I must think over what I must do. What is left me? His thoughts glided quickly over his life unconnected with his passion for Anna. Ambition, Serpukhowsky, society, the court. He could not dwell on any of these things. He rose from the sofa, took off his coat, loosened the strap, and, baring his shaggy chest to breathe more freely, walked across the room. That's how one goes mad, he said again. "And how one shoots oneself so as not to be ashamed," he concluded slowly. Going up to a door, he closed it, then with fixed gaze and tightly clenched teeth, approached the table, took up his revolver, examined it, turned it to a loaded chamber, and pondered. For a minute or two he stood motionless with bowed head, a strained expression of effort on his face, holding the revolver in his hand. "Of course," he said to himself, as if led to a definite conclusion by a logical, continued and clear line of reasoning. In reality, that convinced "of course" was merely the outcome of the repetition of a round of fancies and recollections similar to those he had already gone over dozens of times in the last hour. They were the same memories of happiness lost forever, the same thoughts of the senselessness of all that life had in store for him, and the same consciousness of his humiliation. And they followed in the same rotation. "Of course," he said again, when thought returned a third time to that point in the enchanted circle of memories and ideas. And placing the revolver against the left side of his chest, with a strong movement of his whole hand as if to clench the fist, he pulled the trigger. He did not hear the sound of a shot, but a powerful blow on the chest knocked him off his feet. He wished to steady himself by the table, dropped the revolver, reeled, and sat down on the floor, looking about him in astonishment. He did not recognize his room as he looked up at the girthed legs of the table, and at the waste-paper basket and the tiger-skin rug. The quick step of his servant, coming through the drawing-room, brought him to his senses. He made an effort and understood that he was on the floor, and, seeing blood on the tiger-skin and on his hand, realized that he had tried to shoot himself. "Stupid. Missed," he muttered, feeling with his hand for the revolver. It was close to him, but he sought it further away. Continuing his search, he leaned over to the other side, and unable to keep his balance, fell down bleeding. The elegant servant with the whiskers, who often complained to his friends about the weakness of his nerves, was so upset when he saw his master lying on the floor that he left him to bleed to death and ran away to get help. In an hour's time Varya arrived, and with the assistance of 3 doctors whom she had summoned from every quarter, and who all arrived at the same time, she got the wounded man to bed, and then stayed in the house to nurse him.